anutpanno utpādaḥ svātmānaṃ janayet katham athotpanno janayate jāte kim janyate punaḥ.
Anutpanno utpādaḥ svātmānaṃ janayet katham athotpanno janayate jāte kim janyate punaḥ. MMK chapter 7 verse 13. How could this Genesis of yours, before it is born, cause its own self to be born? Or, in the deeper meaning, how might this unborn arising allow its own breath to develop? How might this unborn going up cause one's own person to develop? Second line. If again what is born causes itself to be born, is it born again when already born? Or, in a deeper meaning, if again this going up, when manifested, causes development, is one born again when already born? So again, this verse, unless you were alerted by the previous verses having an ostensible and a deeper meaning, one would never really guess that this verse had any possible deeper meaning. In fact, I made a footnote 2 years ago saying if there is any deeper meaning, and I haven't seen it yet, but overnight, sort of mulling it over in my sleep, it did occur to me this morning that there is a deeper meaning, and once you've seen it, it's bloody obvious, like one of those psychological puzzles. So on the surface, the question is, how katham could is optative janayet. Janayate is optative causative of jan, so it means cause it to be born. So optative, how could it cause it to be born? So katham janayet, janayate katham, how could it cause it to be born? And the subject is I am this, utpādaḥ, nominative singular masculine, arising or genesis. So in the lexicon of the realist, the substantialist who believes in an original genesis as a non-empty thing, I am utpādaḥ means this genesis. It's the genesis which the opponent expressed in verse, just scrolling back, in verse 8. He said, so might Genesis cause both itself and the other. So, utpādaḥ, svātmānaṃ, utpādayet. So Genesis might cause both itself and the other. So on the surface, verse 13 is responding. Nāgārjuna is on the level of the ontologist, the person who believes in a non-empty Genesis, and he's asking a rhetorical question. How could this Genesis of yours, so before it is born, that's anutpanno, an, not or without, utpanno is past participle of utpādaḥ, which means to arise or to be born. So anutpanno means without being born or before it is born. And the object, so the subject is I am atpādaḥ, this Genesis, square brackets, of yours. And the object is svātmānaṃ, which is accusative of svā, its own, atman, self. So the question is, how could this Genesis of yours, before it is born, cause its own self to be born? So if you want to understand what the ontology of that means, how it's an ontological question, just get Sideris and Katsura's commentary, because that's what they're interested in, or J. Garfield. That's the level on which they see it. But what we've been doing in the last 4 verses is understanding I am utpādaḥ, this going up, this arising, as being this backward step of turning the light and letting it shine. That's how the deeper meaning arises, from practicing the backward step. By, as Master Dogen said, ceasing the intellectual effort of chasing words and pursuing sentences, and learning the backward step of turning our light, letting it shine. Body and mind spontaneously, naturally drop off, and the original features emerge. So the original features of what Nāgārjuna is saying, I suggest, are below the surface. He's not saying what he seems to be saying on the surface. So the question then, if this I am utpādaḥ means this practice of going up, which is also this practice of sthiti, staying still, which is also this practice of bhanga, breaking up, cessation. How might this arising, which is anutpanno, is unborn? And it's unborn in the sense that we're told in the dedicatory verses, pratitya samutpadam prapanchopashamam shivam, dependent arising, the cessation of spin, happiness, is anirodham anutpadam, beyond cessation, beyond arising, beyond stopping, beyond starting, beyond death, beyond birth. So this practice is unborn. That's the hidden meaning of anutpanno, not before it's born, but transcending birth. But how might this unborn arising then janayet, if you look, checking back again in the Sanskrit English dictionary, as I often find myself doing when I start thinking about the deeper meaning, because a Sanskrit word can have so many different meanings, you see. So janayate on the surface means how might it, katham janayet, how might it cause it to be born? But janayet can also mean to grow or to develop, not only to cause to be born, but to cause it to grow, to develop. So in that case, svātmānaṃ, which ostensibly means a non-empty self, a self-existing self, as in the thoughts of the Zen realist, a self which actually exists. Atman, the original meaning of Atman is breath. So in that case, and janayate as a causative, sometimes you can translate it as allow, not directly cause something to happen, but to allow something to happen. So a deeper meaning of the first line is, how might this unborn arising allow its own breathing to develop? In that context, without hammering, without labouring the point too much, they say that Alexander, when he first started teaching his technique, they called him the breathing man, because he was the one that, as an actor or reciter, if you had a breathing problem, he was the guy you went to see. And the way he did that is he got you going up. When we go up, the breathing develops, becomes more full, more free. The respiratory mechanism works in a more unhindered manner. How might this unborn going up allow its own breathing to develop? Okay, so that only makes sense if you understand the previous 4 verses as about going up and stepping back and turning one's own light, letting it shine. And on that subject, again, I was reflecting on the meaning of verse 12, where he says, then no doubt darkness too will cover self and others. And reflecting again on what Marjorie Barlow always calls me to reflect on, which is that being wrong is the best friend we've got in this work. No doubt darkness too will cover self and others. So we tend to think of darkness as being the enemy. Ignorance is the enemy. But what Marjorie emphasised is ignorance or darkness, unconsciousness, wrongness is our best friend in this work. It's a raw material. It's, in Carl Jung's metaphor, it's the darkness down there where the roots of the tree find the nourishment. In Thich Nhat Hanh's metaphor, no mud, no lotus, no horseshit, no strawberries. It's like that. So I was saying I usually wake up in the morning feeling a failure, and that's also part of the same thing. I've learned not to worry too much about it. It's like shit happens, you know, and our job is to make strawberries. So also Jordan Peterson talks about the same thing, you know, about getting over resentment. The dangerous thing is the people, and I would suggest to a lot of women who fall into this category, or anybody who see themselves as the resentful victim. I include myself. Hopefully, more and more, I'm the one who sees it. But maybe not. Maybe on deeper and deeper levels, I'm still failing to see it. But there are so many resentful victims in the world, so many resentful minorities. You know, you switch on the radio, BBC Radio for its Woman's Hour, and yesterday I found myself shouting at the radio, "Shut the fuck up!" as I ran literally to the radio to switch it off, because I'd switched it on, and it was Woman's Hour, and who should be on but a single mother who described herself as a woman of a bisexual single mother who described herself as a woman of colour. For fuck's sake. And I corresponded with my brother by email in the afternoon expressing we were both sort of sick of that. And then it occurred to me this morning as I was reflecting on these things that, talking about trees, my brother said to me a few weeks ago that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and he was actually talking about how like my father I am, not in a good way. But when it comes to being a resentful victim, I didn't learn that from my father. But my mother, her father ran away when she was still very young, and she's gone through it. She's now 80. We should be 18 in October. She's gone through a whole life expressing her deep resentment, or actually not expressing her deep resentment towards her father and towards men in general, including my father. And so you see, I see it in my brother, I see it in myself. You learn these patterns not only from your father but from your mother if you're not careful. And so I begin to see that I learned how to be a resentful victim, and that stops the light from shining. That's why people steer clear of me, because they sense the resentment, and they expect, probably quite reasonably, they expect a person who knows the Buddha's teaching not to be a resentful victim, but that they expect the light to be evident. So it's in that context he's asking, how might this unborn going up allow its own breath to develop, allow its own breathing to develop. It's a question, you see. On the surface, it's a rhetorical question, and he's saying to the ontologist, your argument is absurd, your argument is ridiculous. But below the surface, it's an open question. How might, not how could, but how might, so optative covers both possibilities. How might it be possible? How could it be possible? That this going up, which is beyond birth, might allow the breathing to develop, might allow one to drop off the body and mind of the resentful victim, in other words. And then another possible deeper meaning, you can take svātmānaṃ not only as its own breath, but one's own person. So atman means the breathing, and therefore the self, or the person, or the body, the whole body. So atman can mean the self as conceived in the substantialist philosopher's view of a self-existing self. But a self can also exist it cannot exist. It can be the self can be empty, in the sense when F.M. Alexander wrote his book, The Use of the Self. He called it the use of the self because he didn't want to say the use of the body or the use of the mind. He wanted to suggest the integrative action of the whole. And so to convey that, you could say cause one's own person or cause one's own self. How might this going up, which is beyond birth, cause one's own person to develop? Okay, so again, I think about, well, that's the meaning of Zazen, isn't it? If you truly go up, dropping off the body and mind of the black, the Japanese, the woman, the man, the transgender, transitioning, neither man nor woman, whatever your body and mind is, how can going up, when it's beyond birth, cause one's own true self, not the limited conception we have of who we are, to develop? Then the second line, if again, ata, what is born, utpādaḥ, so with Sandy, athotpanno, if again what is born causes itself to be born, so janayate, so that's third person singular, not optative in this case, just regular, so cause to be born, and the object is understood. Ostensibly, the object is itself. So, if again, what is born causes itself to be born, so athotpanno janayate, then we got a question in the fourth pada. Kim, this is a question word. Jāte means it's locative of jāte, so jāte is past participle of jan, to be born. So jāte means in already being born, when already born, and so it's locative absolute. And then janyate is born, third person singular passive of jan, so is born, and punaḥ again. So jāte kim janyate punaḥ. Is it born again when already born? So again, on the surface, a rhetorical question, sort of laughing at the stupidity of the person who asked the question about an original genesis. If again, what is born causes itself to be born, is it born again when already born? Then if we look for deeper meaning, if again, ata, this arising, so it's taking this arising from the first line, so the subject is I am utpādaḥ, then athotpanno, which means born, or utpanna means the past participle of utpādaḥ can also mean brought forth, born, or manifested, appeared. So you could, in a deeper meaning, if again this going up, when manifested, janayate, causes development. So I'm not giving it an object there, just translating janayate as causes development, causes growth. If again this going up, when manifested, causes growth, causes development, is one born again when already born? So that's the question. Can we say that when you drop off your previous sort of restricted, worrying, petty body and mind by going up, because going up is manifested, as happens in the Good Alexander lesson. Marjorie Barlow's talked about letting go of baggage. She once said to me, I love Buddhism. It's all about letting go of all the heavy baggage we all carry around. So that's what her work was all about as well. So letting go of baggage. I once wrote a poem to memorise an experience I had when, because I used to take my motorbike down to London, down to Swiss Cottage, where Marjorie's house was. She had a flat on the 3rd floor, and if you rang the bell, she would let you in, and you waited downstairs in sort of downstairs hall waiting room, and then when the person there before you came out, you would go up for your lesson. And so I used to time it so her lessons were like half an hour, like a sausage machine, boom, 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 boom. Never went longer than 30 minutes in general, although we often used to go on longer than 30 minutes as it happened, because I got into the habit of waiting so long before I moved my leg. It would go on for hours. But there was one lesson when I got there not in time for my lesson, but in time for the lesson before. So I had half an hour waiting in the waiting room just to quieten down after riding the bike, because I'd be down in London and my shoulders would be up around my ears having driven through the London traffic. So I spent half an hour just settling down there. And as the lesson before me was finishing, Marjorie was saying, I forget in what context, but she was saying, lucky me, she was in her early 80s, she was considering how lucky she'd been there. I memorised the moment by saying, because I didn't hear it, she wasn't talking to me directly, I'd heard her indirectly, and that was part of what Marjorie taught, the power of the indirect. Her teaching was always very indirect. From downstairs I hear, lucky me, and start letting baggage go. The power of the indirect has more wisdom than we know. So, if again, this going up, which is the dropping off of baggage, like body and mind, and resentful victimhood, if again, this going up, when manifested, okay, so not just bullshitting about it, not as I was talking about yesterday, not lying to yourself about it, not putting a mask of a bright smile on top of your resentful malevolence. Because growing up with my mother and sister really has been an object lesson in understanding where especially the women the complaining, whining, resentful women in the world who think that masculinity is bad, that women are good, and if women ruled the world, everything would be better. Would it fuck? If you think women are inherently not malevolent, whereas masculinity is toxic, you are a very, very shallow and superficial person who doesn't know men and doesn't know women. Again, it goes back to Jung's thing, and Nāgārjuna's talking about it in the previous verse. If there's light, it covers self and others. And if there's darkness, it covers self and others. And who is there who's just sweetness and light through and through? And who is there who is an out and out bad guy? Where is the yin without any yang, and where is the yang without any yin? You know, even if you go on YouTube and watch some of these psychopathic mafia hitmen being interviewed, you know, they'll still talk with affection about somebody, whether it's their mother or the one woman who showed them real love, or there's nobody who's evil through and through, and there's nobody who's sweetness and light through and through. And I think the previous verse relates to that, when he talks about light and, in conclusion, about darkness. And I think what Jung and Jordan Peterson are talking about, the tree. Apparently Jung said the reason people aren't enlightened is because they don't delve deep into the darkness. And the superficial women who think that women are all great and men are inherently bad, they're the least enlightened of all. The frightening thing is, though, they seem to be sort of leading. If you switch on Radio 4, that viewpoint, that pathetic, shallow, superficial viewpoint, seems all the clever bods on Radio 4 with their degrees from Oxford University seem to believe that shit. But the question here, if again, this going up, when manifested, okay, not some prat on Radio 4 bullshitting about. I mean, who was it? Tom Sutcliffe, I think I heard on a Start of the Week a few months ago. There was this really excellent dancer, not a choreographer. I forget his name, but he was originally from the Indian subcontinent, so you know, rooted somewhat in Indian dance. And he was talking about the kind of thing that Nāgārjuna was talking about in the chapters on space and physicality, you know. Speaking of which, I was going to say this morning in Zazen, sometimes when I'm directing myself up, I find it useful to look at my right arm like that. I just look at it, and the wrist is somehow like the neck, and the hand is like the head. So you're asking for the head to go forward and up as the whole thing releases. I find it sometimes useful just to look at my arm as I'm thinking that. Okay, so when that happens, it's thinking, physicality in space. That thinking is direction. And on Start of the Week, this Indian choreographer, who was a dancer, not a speaker, was doing his best to explain to the shallow, pathetic, intellectual idiot who was presenting the show. He was trying to say something real, and the response of the presenter was sort of, but surely, totally speaking from his top 2 inches, you know, with absolutely no appreciation of what the person who was speaking to him was talking about. So in that sense, I'm saying utpādaḥ means when it's manifested, when going up is actually manifested. Because in the Alexander work too, there's a lot of people who talk about going up, But actually what they're doing is very subtly arranging themselves. They're blocking, obscuring the light by lying to themselves. Just like my mother and sister spend their whole life lying to themselves and not recognizing the malevolence which is tied up with their resentment towards men. If again, this going up that he's been talking about in the previous 4 verses, when manifested, when really manifested, not when just bullshitted about, causes development. So when it's really manifested, going up causes development. It allows you to grow. It allows you to drop off your baggage. Then the question is one born again when already born? Usually the answers to questions like that are no. But at the same time, it's a question that's worth asking. Is one born again when already born? Anutpanno yam utpādaḥ svātmānaṃ janayet katham athotpanno janayate jāte janyate punaḥ.
anutpanno utpādaḥ svātmānaṃ janayet katham athotpanno janayate jāte janyate punaḥ.